And we're live. It is Monday, the 6th day of October. It is the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. It is Sukkot.
Hmm.
Uh, and I am coming to you live from Dulles Airport because let it not be said that I am not committed to this show. I realized yesterday evening, really, that my assumption about this morning, which was that I was going to do this show, say hi to Noam Dworman, talk to y'all, and then at my leisure get in a cab and go to the airport, was not going to work because the flight from which I'm going to, of all places, Aspen, Colorado, for a meeting, which is, I think, the only reason anybody actually goes to Aspen, Colorado, um, was earlier than I expected it to be. Uh, and that means, just as Anna is, of course, later than I expected her to be, of course, as always. The flight is always earlier than you expect it to be. And that means that I could not sit at home in a leisurely fashion, sip coffee, and um, make my way to the airport afterwards. And so I faced a choice. I could either do this from a car, which I considered, or I could uh, be rude to our guest, which I considered, or I could get up early in the morning, rush to the airport, speed through TSA, hope that everything worked perfectly, and then get into the United Club and annoy all the people around me from while doing this show. And you know me well, folks. I chose the latter. So here I am absorbing the glares of the other people in the United Club who did not come here to watch Dog Shirt TV, but are being unwillingly subjected to it, unlike you. And I'm doing the show. And as those of you who were with us last week know, Anna has been on a quest to find out why there are no good Jimmy Kimmel jokes in the comedy scene in New York. And I thought, who do I know who might have a good sense of the answer to that question? And I thought, well, since much of the story she was telling takes place at the Comedy Cellar, I would just invite Noam Dworman, who just happens to own the Comedy Cellar, and as I explained last week, doesn't really like comedy that much, and actually wants to talk about serious issues, but we keep dragging him back into talking about comedy. And so all of that is a long-winded way of saying that the sun is shining, the birds are chirping, it's gonna be a great fucking day, and you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a goddamn revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that if I have a flight to catch, I do the show anyway. Maybe I do it from an Uber on the way to the show. Maybe I do it from an airport lounge. Maybe I do it. I've never done it from a flight because the bandwidth actually isn't good enough, but it will be soon, and I will. And another one of the revolutionary features is that when we have a question on the show, we just invite the person who may know the answer to that question, and we don't pre-caucus anything with him. And by the way, if he doesn't know the answer, we just kind of move on. Uh, all of which is a long-winded way of saying that we are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Noam Dworman, impresario of the Comedy Cellar, to answer our question, why are there no good Jimmy Kimmel jokes? And Anna, why don't you tell Noam the story and set up the conversation a little bit?
Sure, I'm happy to. Although I'd also like to know if it is even true that Noam does not like comedy, as you have accused him of, because I'm not entirely sure if that's true. So, Noam, is it true that you
Note that
don't like comedy?
he didn't object when I said it.
Well, it's that's hyperbole. It's not that I don't like comedy. I just don't. I'm not a comedy fanatic. I'm not. I don't consider myself a comedy expert. I especially don't. I actually don't like when other comedy club owners start opining as if there's famous stories about like the owner of the comedy store telling Gary Shandling, "No, no, you're a writer, not a performer." Like there's many stories like this of just going to their heads. So I follow the audience. I do like comedy, but it's not my. I'm much more into music.
And
Oh, interesting.
it's
Yeah.
fair to say that that your podcast, which is branded with the Comedy Cellar, is not really a comedy podcast at all, right?
It started out being a comedy podcast with comedians. Then it started out with uh, getting like an op-ed columnist with a comedian to have a conversation, and then we ended up basically just dropping the comedians altogether because they were weighing down the conversation. So,
I
That's amazing.
I'll just
Oh,
say
go ahead,
I
Ben.
I stand by what I said.
Okay,
okay.
fair. All right. Okay, well, I will explain what my little adventure has been in the comedy world in New York. So I recently moved to New York City. And one of the first things that I decided I wanted to do as someone who's never really been to a whole lot of stand-up comedy is I just like wanted to study the form. I just thought it would be interesting. I'm a writer, but do a completely different type of writing that's very like dry and analytical. But I like to laugh. I like to watch the comedy specials, but I just have never had the opportunity to go to a lot of stand-up comedy shows. So I started like going to the Comedy Cellar quite a bit, going to other comedy clubs, and then the Jimmy Kimmel thing happened with I feel like I probably don't have to explain it to you because my understanding of you is that you keep up with current events quite a lot, but and talk about it on the podcast and that kind of thing. But the Jimmy Kimmel, suspension, FCC chair, threats, that kind of thing. Those events happened. And to me, I had in my mind this idea that, like, as a kind of stand up comedy novice, as a consumer, I had this idea in my mind that, like, oh, like, there's going to be a bunch of comedians who are making jokes about this in the coming weeks at some of the comedy clubs because this is like a really good opportunity to kind of do what comedy does, which is like talk about something in in an irreverent way that gives social commentary about politics and current events, and it's also about freedom of expression and the First Amendment, and that's like quite a ripe area for comedians. Like it seems to me that a lot of the material that I see when I've been at these comedy clubs is about like, oh, like, you can't use this word, or like, commentary on making the audience uncomfortable if they're, talking about a certain subject matter or whatever. And it just goes back as well to the history of like people like Lenny Bruce, who, are comedians who were pushing the envelope and doing so to make a point, up to Dave Chappelle, and there's just this whole history of comedians like doing this kind of commentary on censorship and speech. So I'm like, okay, and I make a joke about it on Blue Sky about how I'm gonna courageously volunteer as a journalist to go to all the comedy clubs of New York and see who has the best Jimmy Kimmel jokes. So I decided to follow through on this adventure and do like a comedy club crawl, where I go to, I went to the Comedy Cellar, I went to Gotham, I went to New York Comedy Club, Midtown, I think was my third one. And this was all around the time that all this stuff was happening. And I'm looking for the Jimmy Kimmel jokes, And none of them come naturally. There was one occasion at Gotham in which I was the subject of crowd work because I didn't know that I was going to be seated in the front row. And so I told them what I was doing, and it kind of became a running gag. Like one guy went and got ChatGPT to write some Jimmy Kimmel jokes. So the only like Jimmy Kimmel joke that I really caught was this one comedian who got ChatGPT to write his jokes for him, and the best one of those was like, Ben, what was it? I paraphrase. God, I'm going to butcher
I
it. It
I don't
was,
remember, but it was about how he's washed up and has been
yeah.
coasting for 7 years.
It was
So,
like ABC firing Jimmy Kimmel is like Disney firing Mickey if Mickey had been coasting for 7 years. So,
It's not
and like,
terrible, but
no,
it's
it's not
also
terrible.
but it's also not the point.
yeah,
Yes.
it's not the point. There was so like in all of the jokes that the ChatGPT guy came up with were like about how bad at comedy Jimmy Kimmel is, which is not the point.
Yes.
Maybe is like is funny, but like is not the point. So yeah, I mean, it just was interesting too because in the at the same time, very soon after, there's this whole debate within the comedy world about the Saudi Arabia Comedy Festival and the questions around like should comedians go perform and freedom of expression in that country and like what they had to agree to go to there. And I just found it really interesting that like that became such a huge debate within the comedy world, and I don't keep up with like comedy world discourse that much other than like just enjoying going to shows. But it just seemed like somehow this Saudi Arabia thing became a bigger deal than like Jimmy Kimmel. And Ben and I had a conversation about it, and we were trying to figure out why is it that there doesn't seem to be a lot of good Jimmy Kimmel jokes. And so that is where you come in.
Well, just before I answer, I've been thinking about it as you're speaking. You have a theory about it?
Well,
Yeah.
we batted around a bunch of theories. So one was that uh, people are a little gun shy about it. Another is that they're not political comedians on late night have a team of writers, and that these guys don't. What else did we bat around, Anna?
So I taught one of my friends, Janesh Rollin, is a comedian, and I actually one of the shows that I went to at the New York Comedy Club is a show that he was one of the openers at, and I asked him afterward. I was like, okay, I'm doing this experiment. What do you think is going on here? Why am I not seeing any Jimmy Kimmel material? And his response was, it takes a long there's a lot of nuance for this topic that you have to like really, kind of to develop the bit. It's going to take a little bit of time. And that made sense to me because I've seen comedians and again, I am a total novice to this world. So I'm sure this is like something that's just very obvious to you, but like I have seen comedians who just reuse material that's like the crowd pleaser material at various shows whenever I've seen them, in the lineup multiple times. And it's like that's the material that hits. They know it's going to hit. And it's like they're probably developing other material, on their own time, but it like takes a little bit of time to develop it and to try it out and see if it works. And then maybe it's only recycled into the material like that they're doing, at the Comedy Cellar or whatever on a nightly or weekly basis later on. So there's that theory. I mean, the other theory too is just that like Jimmy Kimmel got suspended for making jokes about this. So like a lot of the people who are performing in comedy clubs though they are established comedians, there's still people who have, things on the line in terms of,
Nah,
no,
yeah,
okay.
that's
All
definitely
right.
not
So
it.
we can,
Yeah,
all right,
yeah,
that's not it.
yeah,
That's great to
yeah,
know that we can rule out
yeah.
a theory. Okay. So
Yes. The,
those are
the
our
only one,
theories that we kicked around.
the only one I would rule out is that the comedians were holding their tongue because they're incapable of that. And I don't think there's any threat. So the things that came to my mind are, first of all, the Comedy Cellar, because and this is actually one of the things about the Comedy Cellar that worries me, because we're so busy and such a like a high pressure stage now for them. They do less riffing and do concentrate more on their most polished material at the club, because there's just a different vibe when you have a sold out show is when it's like 15, 20 people. So but if you didn't see it at other clubs, then maybe that wouldn't be the reason. But that's definitely a reason you see more kind of improvisational, just hacking things around at other clubs. That's number one. Number two, it could just be who you saw. Like people like Sam Morril, there's a lot of them who will, on the day that any story comes out, they will have very funny things to say about it. We don't really book a lot of the really soapboxy comics because they bomb. But the so but and there was a lot of anger about the Jimmy Kimmel thing under the surface among the comedians, and some of it was more sophisticated based on the First Amendment and things like this, and some of it was just like visceral anger at a comedian just getting fired for saying a joke. But I wonder if it was just too closely related to the fact that Charlie Kirk had been assassinated and the nerves were so raw at that time, and any joke about defending Kimmel was somehow going to tread on the fact that you're not taking because what he said, the whole argument, what he said, if you take one side of it, it was a kind of ugly thing that he said, and so it's kind of like endorsing the ugly thing that he said. So maybe people just thought the better of it because the smarter ones understand they don't want to offend more than just a few people in the audience at any given show. They know they're going to offend a few people, right? But when you start thinking about maybe 25, 30% of the audience might find this just a topic that turns them off, maybe they just steer clear of it. I don't know. Or maybe a
Well,
little bit of everything.
well, I prepared a few Jimmy Kimmel jokes,
Okay.
for, because, so first of all, you got some good material to work with here. Brendan Carr has a real kind of Bond villain look to him.
I
And
mean, look, take a picture of him. Go ahead.
I mean, he's got the completely bald pate. He doesn't have like a cat in his lap that
Oh,
he's
yeah.
stroking, but he's got a Bond villain look. And look, I know that he's made this uh like given us some material here because he made me agree with Ted Cruz. And that takes some work. I mean, Ted Cruz, actually, when you've put Ted Cruz out there to, agree with the libs, and I think Megyn Kelly, right? And that you're doing some work. So that was my first effort, and it bombed. Um, so
That,
all right,
oh,
yeah, that
that was
that
a
was
setup. That wasn't a
that.
punchline.
Well, sorry, all right, so let's talk about uh the
But what do you think of
other.
Personally,
my
I
theory,
loved
by the way?
I
What do you think
loved
of my
it,
theory?
Ben.
I think your theory is very plausible. I just don't know. I would have thought there would have been a lot of I would have thought there would have been a lot of good material. But look, your theory is you know these guys, so I think your theory comes with a presumption of regularity.
I mean, one thing is for sure. I'm sorry that for some reason nothing struck anybody as particularly funny. I know these comedians; they would not hold their tongue if there was an obvious joke there. If you went to see 5 or 6 shows, you would have heard one or two of them. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna ask. When I go to work, I'm gonna ask,
All
and
right, so
Yes,
I'll
amazing.
email you. Yeah,
yeah, so no,
I
you can come back. This link that I
yeah.
sent
Okay.
you will work any day. Uh, You're once you've been a guest on the show, you're just allowed to pop in at any time
Oh, that's awesome.
between 8 and 9. And so anytime you have an answer to this question, let us know and just show up.
Or maybe I
Um,
can get you a comedian who wants to really give you an answer. Why
yeah.
he, yeah, yeah. I'll do some investigating for you.
All right. This is
I
excellent.
will also add too that I just was reading yesterday about the Saudi Arabia not film festival,
That's a
comedy
big issue.
festival.
Yeah.
And I read that Dave Chappelle did his whole, because we were talking about this at the end of the episode last week when we originally brought up this topic. And we were talking about how, it kind of depends on how you do it and how you approach it. And like, are you gonna do some type of critique or something, like how are you going to approach the set? And apparently Dave Chappelle did his whole set about like using it as a way to make commentary about freedom of expression in the US as opposed to critiquing the Saudi regime in a kind of ironic way. And he apparently had some Jimmy Kimmel jokes in there, which I have not seen or heard or read the set. So I don't know what the exact content was, but I feel like it just does go to show that maybe it is coming, now there's a little bit of a lag, but potentially there will be some actual Jimmy Kimmel
No,
jokes
it's too late. It's not,
coming.
not,
No, it's too
yeah, no,
late.
it's too
Okay,
late.
fair
Yeah.
enough.
I mean, at a corporate event of people like you, maybe, but like the average Joe, it's gone. That
Doesn't
issue.
care. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was one of the things one of the comedians at Gotham when I was being subjected to crowd work said, which was basically that not enough people watch Jimmy Kimmel or care about Jimmy Kimmel for anyone to make jokes about him.
Now, this is what Chappelle. I'm interested to hear what Chappelle said as well. To many of us, the notion that Dave thinks that you're freer to speak your mind in Saudi Arabia than America, just seems crazy, right? But I think what you're seeing there is that he was so stung by the backlash against him when he was trying to make jokes about, trans issues or whatever it was. And in a way, I know him pretty well. He's a very kind-hearted person and very open person, Like just as an illustration, I'm friends with Coleman Hughes, the black kind of I don't know if he's conservative or not, but Coleman believes most of the things that Dave doesn't believe, right? And we were in the Olive Tree a couple weeks ago, and I introduced Coleman to Dave. Dave was about to go on, and they got into a conversation, and Dave just blew off his spot, and they talked for like an hour and a half. And afterwards, I said, what do you think, Dave? Dave says, I just love having a few drinks and spending time speaking to smart people. This was his attitude about Coleman, who I'm sure he didn't agree with anything about, right? So he's very, very, got a very wholesome attitude, actually, about these things. So anyway, so I think that he was just very bitter about what he went through. And I think that's what you're seeing there. I think if you pinned him down, he would acknowledge, yes, you have certain freedoms in America that you don't in Saudi Arabia. So
All
I
right.
think he would. Yeah.
So let's talk about another issue that came up
Yeah.
when we were talking comedy the other day, which is why there are no tragedy clubs. And what would happen if you had a sister club, next door or something, that every day you would have stand-up tragedians just telling sob stories that weren't funny?
Well, I mean,
I mean,
that's
you could
kind of
call it This American Life if you want, but it would basically be a tragedy
that's a
club.
good joke. Yeah. I mean, there is actually, I don't know if you can start a club for that, but there is, this kind of like poetry room audience for people to get out there and bare their soul and tell all the terrible things that happened to them. It's tough to institute a 2 drink minimum for that stuff, but yeah, I think there is a market for poignancy, and for tear jerking, but I don't know if you could do 90 minutes of it.
Do you ever have non-comedy nights at the Comedy Cellar
Wait,
where
go ahead.
people like just talk about, it's sort of like I don't like a Spalding Gray kind of. I mean, there are jokes in
Yeah.
there, but it's really just more of a monologue on a serious subject.
Yeah, we have had things like that where various comedians have come to us and wanted to do things like that. We've had storytelling nights. Remember Quentin Crisp? He was kind of like this, like a monologist, yeah. Um, but they don't really draw big, and certainly not repeat customers. People want to go out, drink,
It's something
laugh.
like they want to laugh.
Well, a lot of um a lot of what how I put it, a lot of people who end up at a comedy club are there less for the comedy than you would imagine. The first question in their mind is, it's Saturday night. What do you want to do? They want to go do something, right? And they want to go do something with their friends. And they want it to involve alcohol and having a good time and maybe a place that, to so that you can take a date, whatever it is. And comedy fits that. They're not there because they're aficionados and they just have to see comedy. They would have been just as happy going to the movies or going to various other things. So comedy allows people to laugh and pat each other on the back and have something to talk about after the show and enjoy their friends enjoying something, and it's just all a very much a social vibe, and that's how I see my business, and that's why these other things I think are just not so viable.
It's also a lot of tourists, right? Like my
Yeah,
experience of going is like usually when people are like when they're doing crowd work and they're like, "Where are you from?" It's like Oklahoma, Texas,
yeah.
Arkansas. Like I don't know what the clientele is in terms of New York residents versus tourists, but it seems like a lot of tourists to me.
Well, that's always been a question we haven't known the answer to, but after COVID, when there were no tourists, our business immediately came back. So there are enough people in New York to fill up our shows. But I think what happens as tourism came back, tourists make reservations earlier because they're planning their trips, and they begin to crowd out the locals who can't get in. So I would imagine, and that's not a good thing for us. As a matter of fact, I had actually told our web designer one time I wanted to create some kind of system where if somebody had an out of town area code, that they would be put on the wait list and give us more time, whatever it is. But then I began to feel that maybe somebody would consider it illegal because maybe some of the neighborhoods would be more minorities. Who the hell knew? Like, was at a time when you were worried about? So I said I better not get into that. But I would like to, and I don't want to. We have plenty of New Yorkers, but you're right. There are a lot of tourists that come to the Comedy Cellar. Maybe less so at other clubs.
So tell us
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
other Noam Dworman
Yeah.
persona. You've got the 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 guy who runs the Comedy Cellar and is a businessman, and then
Hmm.
you've got the guy who's kind of a contrarian, who, by the way, as I acknowledged on the show the other day, nailed one, got one exactly right at my expense, which was your instincts about the Nord Stream 2 operation were much closer to correct than my own. So you've got but you're mostly when you comment on things there, it's in a very serious mode, not a joking mode. Uh, what animates your public commentary?
Well, I went to law school, and I had a very politically. I went to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and I had a very politically interested father. So, and like most Jews, also, this is like dinner table stuff. And I don't know. From time to time, another issue, we were on opposite sides of was the RussiaGate stuff. From time to time, as an issue comes along, where I just feel like everybody's getting it wrong, and it animates me to get into it. But at the very bottom line is just what interests me and what entertains me. Actually, what I want to spend my time doing. And somehow I didn't expect it. Um, I developed some kind of audience for this stuff. So that's that. I wish I had a deeper answer.
So I am banned from Twitter, so
Yeah, yeah. How are you banned
so
from Twitter?
I haven't seen any of this stuff myself. I was banned from Twitter because I kind of did it on purpose. But I uh, on April Fool's Day in 2022 or 2023, I can't remember which.
Hmm.
I mocked up my account as the Russian embassy account. So I impersonated the Russian embassy account, and I replaced and I spent the whole day tweeting images of the Russian embassy done up with my, I project stuff on the Russian embassy. And so we have a new decor. Look at our new embassy, and it's, the Russian embassy with a big Ukrainian flag on it. And I was doing it for a day, and the Russians didn't seem to think it was nearly as funny as I did. And at the end of the day, I just tweeted, this is fun. I'm going to keep it up until my account disappears. And the account vanished a second later. And I've considered it sort of beneath my dignity to petition Elon for reinstatement. So I've just been off Twitter ever since. But the result of
That's
that
awful.
is that I am unaware of your recent Twitter campaigns, of which Mike Pesca says I have to ask you. And so I am hereby asking you about them because I always do what Mike Pesca says because he's a great American. And apparently he is very enamored of your recent Twitter campaigns. So tell us about them. And that's an open-ended question because I don't really know anything about it.
Well, first of all, I think you should petition to get back on Twitter in a way that's, like have a lawyer send it. I don't know, in a way that doesn't sacrifice your self-respect, because you should. I mean, this is your profession in a sense, and you should be able to be in the thick of things, in my opinion. And of course, you can get a burner account, and yeah,
I mean, I have a burner
yeah,
account, but I don't
yeah,
use it.
yeah.
That's the
But it,
Jewish space laser account is me.
but it's quite disturbing that, given the fact that you have the most vile Nazis out there as Twitter members in good standing, that you would be banned. This is an outrage, and I wonder if Musk is even aware of it. Anyway, I mean, because you didn't even step on his toes, right? It's he doesn't give a shit about the Russian embassy.
I
Uh,
don't know who
yeah,
was responsible for it. I mean, I
yeah,
assume the Russians complained.
yeah.
And I was, to be fair, impersonating another account. I was violating the terms of service, Noam,
Yeah, I get it.
I have to suffer the consequences of that.
But anyway, so as far as my thing goes, I mean, the I had been predicting for a long time. I mean, 2017, even predicting a coming bottom falling out of the support for or the opposition against anti-Semitism in America. I just kind of saw it coming. I saw wokeness as a kind of destruction of all the intellectual girdings of against bigotry, and an embrace of the kind of notion that that it was proper to judge people by their color of their skin, their ethnicity, and their privilege, and Jews were the obvious targets there, that Israel would always be seen as the oppressor. I felt that American Jews who were liberal and democratic were kind of indulging their social justice id in the Democratic Party, because the right had become the bulwark of protect. That a few good men. You want us on that wall, like that was the Republicans. They were on that wall. They were the ones worried about Israel. They were the ones worried about Jewish issues. And I remember saying many times that, well, the day that the support for Jewish issues in the Republican Party just decreases a little bit down to the level that it's at in the Democratic Party, both sides are going to go into a free fall. And this was become an obsession with me. And I was emailing Barry Weiss and Brett Stevens, and I remember had Alan Dershowitz on my podcast early on and saying, Alan, this is going to be the last Democrat you're going to support. Mark my words, because after Biden, it's all over. And this became an obsession. And then on the Joe Rogan show, you began to see it was like one little thing where he made that joke about Jews loving money like Italians love pizza, but it wasn't really a joke. He was defending Ilhan Omar for her comments about Jewish power. It's like little things were seeping in, becoming like conventional wisdom. And I don't mind Jewish jokes, just to be very, very clear. And then Robert Malone was coming on saying stuff about Jews. It was just, you'd see it all over. It's becoming a very long answer. And then Darryl Cooper, and then Tucker Carlson started. And Tucker Carlson had already shown that he was kind of crazy. Anyway,
Tucker is an out-and-out anti-Semite.
Yeah, well, they're all becoming that way now. But then what's happening, then I began to hit on this theory that, what I noticed, like Rogan is not an anti-Semite. And I don't even think Dave Smith is an anti-Semite, but Rogan's attached to Dave Smith, who's then attached to Candace Owens, who's then attached to Dan Bilzerian, and it goes from Joe Rogan all the way down to the worst of the worst of the worst. And I began to call it innocence by association, as opposed to guilt by association, that because there was this long chain of people connected to each other, and none of them would ever turn and fire on the other, that there was a mantle of respectability that was being offered to the very, very bottom that was really starting at the very, very top. And sure enough, this is what has been happening. And you could see me like 2 years ago talking about this. October 7th was an accelerant. And now you see just recently, now Megyn Kelly's a friend of mine, but I wrote her about this. Candace Owens, who says that Christian babies disappear on Passover because Jews kill them to this day. And Megan's confronted about that. And she says, well, she's gone through a lot of stress. She's got young kids. I'm like, my wife's under a lot of stress. She doesn't go Nazi. So, and now Candace Owens has become like a made man within MAGA. And I suspect that J.D. Vance, agrees with these people. Oh, just another example. Alex Jones, right? Alex Jones, what he did to those Newtown parents, like this is pure uncut evil. Like if there's anything anybody's ever done that there's literally zero constituency of support for, it's what Alex Jones, we know, did to the, and yet Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson set about rehabilitating this guy. It's and he's also an anti-Semite, right? But it's like, what the F is going on?
Yeah, so let me ask you about this, because I struggle with some of this myself, honestly. I built Lawfare on what you might think of as an argument with the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, when is it, if ever, legitimate to detain terrorists or suspected terrorists at Guantanamo or Bagram? When is it legitimate to use lethal force with drones? When is it legitimate to, to have broad, expansive, inchoate criminal liability theories? And then the right went insane. And the result was that I find myself on most things of consequence to be allied with the left, although not with any deep feeling of spiritual or intellectual commonality. And so I don't deal in the public intellectual space like you're talking about, or the public commentariat space. But when you look at, you get animated to enter the political discussion because you're anti-woke, whatever quite that means. But let's not get into that for present purposes. And then you see what you describe as true monstrous evil and covering for it among people you think of as friends in the right-wing ecosystem. How do you think of yourself in relation to political movements now in light of that kind of whipsaw that you've experienced?
Yeah, well, I've never I'm not registered in any party and I don't vote, and I've never considered myself partisan in any way. People don't believe me, but they kind of realize it when all of a sudden I'm saying things that they wouldn't have expected me to say, right? Um, I Trump, I think MAGA has left Trump. We saw it once earlier in a way that people didn't give Trump credit for. That was on the vaccine. Trump was never anti-vax. Trump loved the vaccine. And some of the stuff that people use in that case that he was quiet about the vaccine, if you look into it, they don't hold up. But I made this analogy. John Haidt kind of made the same analogy. Sometimes the guy on the elephant steers the elephant, and sometimes the elephant goes where it wants to go. And MAGA went where it wanted to go on the vaccine stuff. And MAGA is going where it wants to go now on Israel and the Jews. I'm extremely appreciative to Trump without regard to 20 other things that I find him reprehensible on. As a singular figure in modern Jewish history right now, is, in my opinion, being basically the only politician there is or could be in either party who is like, fuck off. Maybe Fetterman's the only other one. It's like, no, I am going to stand against anti-Semitism and stand for Israel, and I don't give a shit what anybody says. He's got his finger in his dike on the right and his finger in his dike on the left, and we don't know what's going to happen when he leaves. Post-Trump MAGA, J.D. Vance MAGA, is very, very scary to me.
But why do you
Yeah,
give
it's
Trump
unanswered.
but why do you give Trump a pass on Nick Fuentes, or why is he different in this regard from
Yeah,
Megyn Kelly, um, who you say is sort of at the top of the pyramid and covering for lots of
yeah,
people below
yeah,
him? It seems to me that criticism is as valid about Trump as it is about her, if not more so. I mean,
well,
Laura
no.
Loomer is not good for the Jews.
No, it's a fair criticism. First of all, Nick Fuentes, if you look into it, NBC, I think, reported that Trump actually didn't know who Nick Fuentes was or that he was coming, but he certainly knew who Kanye was.
Yeah, he knew who
Yeah,
Kanye
yeah,
was, and
yeah,
he knew who Nick Fuentes was afterwards, certainly,
yeah,
and
yeah,
he certainly hasn't run away from it at all
yeah,
or said, "I had
yeah.
no idea."
I don't give him a pass, but if I take your fair criticisms of it and I set it off against his proactive actions and remarks and courage, for lack of a better word. It's hard to imagine Trump being courageous. The delta between those is enormous. So I don't want to forgive him for his transgressions, but if he has those transgressions in the, as all politicians do, in the pursuit of doing what he has to do to be able to get the reins of power to pursue his actual agenda, the actual agenda that he's pursuing is on Israel, is up my alley and is singular in the sense that I can't imagine any other politician pursuing it this way. So if that was the price that we paid for that, there's no perfect world. But Trump is a politician. When you get into it as a journalist, your oath is different. Your oath is to the truth, and we're seeing that oath violated in a grotesque way. I mean, the stuff that Candace Owens has said, and Candace Owens handpicked guest host Ian Carroll, who was an outright Holocaust denier, who 2 hours after Charlie Kirk was murdered saying Israel did it and everybody knows it. This is, like I said in the past, when we were kids, Ben knows this. You had the Weekly World News over here, and then you had the New York Times, and we knew the difference. you're seeing the full weekly world newsification of the right wing, or of the huge portion of the right wing media sphere. There is no difference between things that I mean, Tucker Carlson says he was mauled by demons. He says that we're studying underwater aliens that are satanic, literally satanic. That Alex Jones is a divine prophet. I mean, he should be laughed out of court, right? Like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. And people like Megyn Kelly, who is, like I said, she's a friend of mine and she's a serious person. For some reason, she's put her finger in the air and she's decided, well, I'm not going against these people. But she's a journalist.
Have you talked to her about it?
I emailed her, and I haven't spoken to her. We're not good friends by any stretch of the imagination. I've met her twice in person and have had some conversations with her. She mentions me on her show sometimes. I definitely don't want to overstate the relationship, but I think there is a real mutual respect there. I am 100% sure she is not sympathetic to these anti-Semites. She's not an anti-Semite. So there's something else going on there, but she's hardly unique. But the problem is, when I used to come after like people like Dave Smith a year ago, like, how come you are not saying something about Candace Owens? Now that much less aligned people like Megyn Kelly are not saying anything about Candace Owens, Dave Smith will say to me, what are you coming at me for? People way to the left of me don't give a shit about Candace Owens. You think I'm supposed to say something? Like, I'm on her side basically about issues. Here the people who oppose her think she's all right. So it's very worrisome. I mean, worrisome is understating it. It's a 5-alarm fire. Where is this going to end? So anyway, on Twitter, I have a lot of videos. I do a lot of research. I expose Daryl Cooper. I expose how they're all repeating David Irving theories. David Irving, the famous Holocaust denier. I mean, I've done a lot of work. It's weird that I'm somehow a player in all this, but I am in some way.
So I'm curious, like, I mean, maybe this is just asking the same question that Ben kind of just got at, but like, to my mind, I think it's a mistake to separate out like these commentators from the administration totally, because the administration is often promoting these people and aligned very closely with them, giving them media access to the White House in a way that usually the traditional press would get, giving them exclusive interviews, it feels like there is such a close relationship between a lot of these people who you find objectionable and the way that the Trump administration is treating them is to prop them up rather than to say, like, this isn't true, or this isn't, fact-based journalism. In fact, like the Alex Jones example, most recently, I don't know if you saw this, but there's this guy named Ed Martin who is a top official in the Justice Department. And he has been sending a number of letters to people because he is the head of this group they're calling the Weaponization Working Group, where they're looking back at old cases that they believe to be, an example of weaponization of government. And in the course of his, job doing that, this guy, Ed Martin, sent a letter to one of the FBI agents who was one of the first responders at Sandy Hook, who was one of the guys who was part of the suit where all the parents, got a bunch of money because of Alex Jones' lies about what
So
happened there. And
yeah.
it was, an example of an administration official like participating in fueling this myth or harassment of people who were just deeply affected by the Sandy Hook massacre. So like
Okay.
I don't know, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, my response, first of all, I don't follow it closely. I might very well agree with you on some of these things. Some of these things I think are mushrooming up as we speak. I mean, Trump did refer to kooky Tucker Carlson the other day, but I mean, if we're being, savvy people, we understand that politicians have their first priorities to get elected and is political, and they make all sorts of compromises. Trump made some that I don't appreciate, but in a very just zoomed out common sense way. If Al Sharpton is a figure that every Democrat thinks he needs to have a relationship with, as clearly they do. When Ilhan Omar is sitting there with Al Sharpton and makes whatever compromise, I don't know if it's not a compromise for her, or when Fetterman might find himself at a table or a dinner with Al Sharpton, to me, they fall on me as drastically different things to react to, because Fetterman is out there every day saying, fuck you, release the hostages. Like I see where Fetterman is. So if he has to make that compromise to stay on the right side of his polls in Pennsylvania, I don't like it, but I got to grow up. I got to grow up, because that's the way it is. But when Ilhan Omar does it, it's a different thing to me, and it should be a different thing to anybody who's watching it. So where Trump falls in that spectrum, you can make the call. But on anything that has mattered, they've been calling Trump an anti-Semite for 10 years, and my answer was always been, well, with enemies like Trump, we don't need friends. I mean, who has stood up when push came to shove for this? Even the things that we hate, like I'm pretty sure we all don't like the way he's cracking down in a way that violates the First Amendment on protesters at universities, people protesting Israel and stuff like that, deportations, all that. You may not know where I am, but I'm quite sure that you're on the side against that. I'm against that too. Nevertheless, where is that coming from? I mean, it's coming from his overzealous approach to an issue which is close to my heart, which is the universities have been hypocrites now, grotesque hypocrites on this issue of free speech forever, until it came to anti-Semitism, in which case they discovered the First Amendment. Fuck them, they're lying. We all know they're lying. That's Trump's attitude. Now, I can't support what he's doing, but I appreciate where he's coming from. I appreciate his righteous anger.
So let me.
Would Obama have that righteous anger? Never.
So I wanna dig a little bit deeper to the premise here, which is that I actually share a lot of your uh, views of left anti-Semitism, and have written about it. And I'm not, I don't have a lot of apologies to make for it. But I do distinguish between, you know, criticism of the Israeli government, which seems to me to have adopted a set of pretty indefensible policies in Gaza, and anti-Semitism. And I don't look at, for example, John Fetterman as somebody who's um, been especially responsive to the situation, which seems to me that you have the Israeli government has gotten some things spectacularly wrong in the months or a couple years since October 7th, and has, probably unnecessarily killed a lot of people. And so I guess I'm kind of curious what's your tolerance level of people who are, very intolerant of a lot of the same anti-Semitic material that you are, but are also really uncomfortable defending the Israeli policy at this time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not calling anybody who's critical of Israel anti-Semitic. God forbid. That's a ridiculous thing to say, because all you have to do is read Ehud Barak and understand that you can be, ready to die for Israel and criticize the prosecution of the war. So that's not what I'm saying. But obviously the trite examples, like how many missteps, how many generals did Lincoln have to fire, how many terrible things and mistakes did they make in the Civil War? The notion of sitting back and criticizing the considered judgment of the smartest minds of the IDF, and then turns out they might have gotten this wrong or that wrong, and then and ignore all the fabulous successes, like getting rid of Hezbollah, defeating Iran, all this stuff. This is the kind of cherry picking I'm not inclined to do. One thing, and I'll stipulate, I'm sure they've killed some people they shouldn't have killed. I'm sure they committed war crimes. Whether or not this is outside the range of what Western powers have done in previous wars. I doubt it. If you had told me as an American citizen in the 40s about things that America was doing that were over the line vis-a-vis fighting the Nazis, I would say they should stop that. But what does that have to do with our war against the Nazis? No one's talking about ending our war against the Nazis, are you? Because if that's what you're talking about, you're out of your mind. Of course, if we're doing something we shouldn't do, we should stop doing it. But don't confuse that with the righteousness of our cause here. Don't confuse that with defeating Hamas, which is absolutely essential and the right thing for Israel to do. And to the extent that Hamas has figured out a way to put civilians between itself and any target that Israel might rationally want to hit, then let's make sure we never lose sight of that, which is an outright war crime and drives all this. If Hamas would take all its people and say, go to the beach, pitch tents and go to the beach, Israel would not be bombing the beach. They would not be bombing the beach. Anybody thinks that is out of their mind. But I just want to say one very important point. We in America are used to the idea of armchair warriors. Most of our recent presidents evaded the draft. Most of the time when American presidents send people to fight and die in wars, they're sending the quote-unquote deplorables, the Southerners, whatever it is. They send them off to fight. Not a single person they know loses people in these wars. That is what we are used to. In Israel, they are sending their own children, their neighbors' children, their cousins. Gadi Eisenkot was in the war cabinet. He lost his own son. So my attitude is, when a man makes a decision, a military decision, that winds up with the death of his own son, I don't sit back and say, you're making a lot of bad decisions. I'm going to have to say, you know what? I'm going to have to wait and see. But it is prima facie, beyond good faith decision when you're risking your own son's life on it. And I think we even here are under this acid rain psychological deterioration where all we have to do is think for 3 seconds about us having rockets coming into our neighborhood on a regular basis, in and out of bomb shelters, even if none of us ever died. America would not live that way, not for a week, let alone for years. And we would expect our government to take care of it. And we would kill a lot of people.
All
Let's
right.
not kid ourselves.
So we have 3 minutes left.
Yeah. You disagree with me?
I agree with much of that and disagree with an important portion of that, but not. Look, I agree, and I think I wrote on October 8th or 9th that there was no way to do this that was not going to look horrible and have horrible consequences, and that when you attack a state, the state will defend itself. And
Can I say one thing because you're out of time?
I also think that the policies of the last 6 months, which have driven the Gadi Eisenkots and out of government, have been, in my mind, completely indefensible. And so I agree with a lot of what you're saying and disagree with a component of it.
Yeah. So
I'll give you the last word, though.
Yeah, the food chapter, in my mind, was also indefensible. I mean, I've done a lot of reading about how it happened and why it happened. The worst explanations don't wash with me, but the more benign explanations are not flattering at all to the Israeli leaders. And I think this was an ugly result of their coalitional politics. That chapter, I'm in agreement with you. It was immoral, I think, with the games they ended up playing with the food. People being shot, not knowing whether to line up to get aid. This was reprehensible. Other than that, I'm reluctant to think I know better. Netanyahu, some of the people who disagree with Netanyahu, he turned out to be vindicated by. If this plan comes to fruition, and there's actually all this huge development and investment in Gaza, and an international coalition, and that actually there could be an optimistic future for the Palestinians, it'll be hard to say that Netanyahu would have been right to have just abandon the war 6 months ago without this outcome and just kick the can down the road to another war. So I don't know. It's very hard to know.
We're gonna
I'm not a
leave.
pro Netanyahu guy.
We're gonna leave it there.
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I know we only
Yeah.
have 1 minute, but the chat is going to lose their minds if I don't ask you this question that is not related to the very interesting discussion that we just had.
Yes.
Last week, I mentioned this and they want to know what's going on with it. When I went to the Comedy Cellar recently, I brought my little notepad that in between sets, I was taking atmospheric notes. I was not stealing jokes, and
All
I
right.
got in trouble because I didn't know that you're not allowed to take notes during
Ah.
at the Comedy Cellar. And a server came up to me and said, "Ma'am, there's no note taking here." And so everyone wants to know what is up with that. Is it an anti joke stealing mechanism or what?
Yeah, it's an anti-joke stealing mechanism. It's an anti-journalist facilitating mechanism. It's not my. It's my policy, but it's a pass through of what the comedians want. It's not like
Okay,
yeah.
got
We
it. Cool.
are
I hope they
gonna
weren't
leave it.
overzealous because sometimes they are overzealous. I hope they weren't. Yeah.
We are gonna leave it there.
Yeah.
Overzealous servers, uh, Israel Gaza stuff, running comedy clubs, and of course Jimmy Kimmel jokes. Noam Dworman, you're a great American. It's great to see you again. Come back anytime. And folks, we're going to do this again tomorrow. And you're all great Americans and at least one great Israeli. And we will see you tomorrow.
Safe flight.